Welcome to the Ghostly Gallery podcast, a place where we explore the world of horror in film, television, literature, and popular culture. Well, greetings, everyone. Welcome to the program. My name is Bruce Markison. As always, I'm joined by producer and co-host Tracy Asteria. Tracy, how did your Halloween go?
Oh, not too bad at all, Bruce. It was actually really quiet this year, which is really surprising because it was like 17 degrees Celsius Halloween night, which is really not normal for this time of year here. So it was a beautiful night, but not many kids around. So it was pretty quiet. How about you?
Yeah, you said you had about half dozen kids came by. That was about it.
Yeah, that's about it. It was pretty quiet here in town. So, which is strange.
Yeah. Well, that's a half dozen more than we had at our house. We don't get a lot of people at the house, but as of course you know, and many of the listeners know, I work at the Baseball Hall of Fame. And one of the things that we've done at the Hall of Fame for many years is we have handed out candy to the trick-or-treaters late in the afternoon, usually around 3:30 till closing time at 5 o'clock. So we had hundreds of kids come by, and I was one of the people that was handing out candy. My wife Sue was there too. I scared a few off because I once again wore my Frankenstein outfit, and at 6'4", I can be a little frightening, especially with the mask. I mean, even a little bit without the mask, but certainly with the mask. Most of the kids, though, did come through the line in our plaque gallery. And I would say, Tracy, we had about 250 to 300 kids come through. So it was a lot of fun. It really was.
Oh my gosh, that's awesome. I bet you lots of
Yeah.
cool costumes.
Yeah, there were. One of the interesting ones, somebody went as a plague doctor, where they have that really strange mask that sort of points out, that dark
Hmm.
mask. That was really odd. I'll tell you, it was interesting. One of the more popular costumes, construction workers. I must have seen 6, 7, 8 kids in construction worker outfits. That's become a big deal.
Oh, wow. I can't see it. I
Yeah,
can't say I've actually seen some of those this year. That's kind of
yeah.
interesting.
I think that's a job that these kids want to do, apparently. Now, they're going to have to wait a
Very
few
good.
years, obviously. These were little kids, but that was a very, very popular costume. Not too many of the traditional monsters. I didn't see anybody else like Frankenstein. There was no Dracula, not too many vampires. But the construction worker, that has actually become, very interestingly, one of the more popular costumes that we see in 2024. Then I was able to come home after dinner and I watched a doubleheader of films. One I'd seen before, one I had not. The first film, which I saw, The Body Snatcher, I hadn't seen it in a few years. It's an absolute classic. Boris Karloff, Henry Daniel. It's just as good now as I remember it from 6 or 7 years ago. One of the best films Karloff ever did. And then I watched a 1974 made for TV movie that was put together by Dan Curtis. He's, of course, the Dark Shadows guy. And this movie was called Scream of the Wolf. It had Peter Graves from Mission Impossible and Airplane fame. And he plays like a big game hunter who comes out of retirement to try to figure out this wolf that's doing all sorts of damage to this town, and he determines it's actually not just a wolf but it's a human that takes on wolf form, and that leads to a real showdown between himself and the other key actor in the film, Clint Walker. I can't say that it was one of Dan Curtis's best movies. It's not like Burnt Offerings or House of Dark Shadows, but it was decent. I mean, I was glad I watched it. I was glad I had a chance to see it, and certainly a respectable movie, as just about all of his horror productions were. So those are the movies I ended up watching. How about you? Did you watch any films that night?
No, I did not. It was an early night, but my weekends will be jam-packed with some extra spooky movies.
All right. Well, I made sure to take the next day off because I knew I was going to be exhausted, and I was. But certainly an eventful Halloween for me here in Cooperstown. And we're also looking forward to an eventful show this week on the Ghostly Gallery. So, in this program, Tracy and I are going to give our reviews of the new version of Salem's Lot which recently debuted on HBO Max. But that's going to be coming up later on in the program. First up are featured guests, and we have three of them. They are all actors, they all reside in England, and they're all part of a new short film called The R.I.P Man. This is a film that was developed by a filmmaker named Rhys Thompson, who wrote the screenplay. So we're going to talk about that with all three of them. By the way, the R.I.P. Man was recently shown at the Hollywood Horror Film Festival in October. It was nominated for 4 different awards, so it's received some very nice reviews. So we'll talk a little bit about the film. We'll talk about the backgrounds of these 3 actors who join us. We have Owen Llewelyn, Mia Bowd, and Cal Chapman. So greetings to Owen, Mia, Cal. Welcome to all of you. Thanks for joining us here in the gallery.
Thanks for having us.
Hi, pleasure to be here.
So we're going to begin with Owen. We want to talk a little bit, Owen, about the basic storyline of the film. You play the title character, obviously very important. So give us a short synopsis of what this film is all about.
So it's essentially a story about a group of teenagers where, if you've seen the short film that's been released, which enacts the first scene, and that's about a young girl being murdered by this mysterious character called the R.I.P Man, who has no teeth. And when he specializes when killing people by mutilating their mouth and stealing a tooth at the end of every death, which he places in the mouth guard, which he wears, which has the words R.I.P. on them. He's specifically targeting this group, and it's all a sort of an unfolding mystery as to where it goes from there.
They're teenagers living in a town that's supposedly well off. The people, the families there are wealthy. Do we know specifically why he's targeting these kids? Is that something that is made evident or not?
There are reasons behind it, but then it's part of the plot that's unveiled that we can't really give that part away at the moment. But there are definite reasons for it.
So we were sent by Rhys Thompson the short film. So is this is the first segment of other segments that are to follow? Is that how it's going to work?
Yeah, it was filmed as a proof of concept, but also it's the first scene of the film. So and the feature that will be happening, that scene is basically what unfolds the rest of the story. Why was she killed? What, like, who is there? Because they're all sort of, the characters originally just don't know who to blame. Whether it's they have no idea it's this R.I.P. man. They're all considering each other, and
You have an interesting look in the movie. You look a little bit, I guess, like a vampire. Not quite Nosferatu, not quite that extreme, but you have a little bit of a vampirish look, and yet you don't really have any teeth. So you're almost a reverse vampire here.
I hadn't thought of it in that sense, but yes, one of the references Jamie gave, Jamie and Rhys gave when originally telling me about the character, was that they wanted touches of Nosferatu in there. So yeah, well spotted.
Oh, that's so cool.
All right, let's talk to Cal Chapman, also a part of this film, The R.I.P. Man. So Cal, tell us about your role, what you do in the movie, and how this part came about for you.
Hi, Bruce. Lovely to speak with you. Absolutely. So yes, where to start? So, fantastic. So my role, my character's called Timmy. I was just listening to you speak a second ago and really, really agreeing with it. So I think this film has, a powerful like scream to it. I know what you did last summer. It's got this like any good horror, it's got this building tension and suspicion and accusation. So I think as the script's developed, they're uni students now. I think it's been aged up, or like college, for yourself. My role, Timmy, I'd say he's one of the more like brash, a bit of a joker, a bit bold, the one that's quick with a joke. And it's a lot of fun to be able to play that role because you can be very free on set and look for a laugh and try and make your other actors laugh and be very generous. So it's fun. It's fun to play. But yeah, like any of the other students and friends in the group, it starts off with, well, who can you trust anymore? Can you really trust your best friends? The people you sit across from in the bar, can you really be 100% sure that they wouldn't? And so yeah, we're really playing off that fear, that suspicion, that distrust. But then as we get into the more sort of like terrifier elements, and now we like live in some slasher horror and get into the nitty-gritty, then it gets a bit more bold and every man for himself as we learn more about the killer, his intentions, and how it's all interconnected. But yeah, just as Owen said, you'll have to tune in to see why. But yeah, what was the last one on how I came into it?
Yeah.
I think Mia and I both the same, just through casting websites and casting networks. I think we have it's like Mandy and Backstage and Spotlight. So I applied for it. I really liked the brief and the breakdown, as it sounds like you guys did as well. So I was really interested when the film came my way, and I sent a message over to Jamie. We all sort of had quite a casual audition process where it was more sort of meeting at a bar and almost recreating one of the scenes early on in the film and just sort of chatting and getting to know and seeing where people's heads are at. What film are we all going to try and make the same film? Are we all ready to? Do we all know what is involved in indie filmmaking and the labor of love it can be? Are we all ready to, get into this together? And yeah, it was a lovely group of people, and I could see quite how much Jamie and Rhys believed in the project, and how passionate they are. And it just sort of seemed like a winner. It's early days and we're into principal photography now, but so far it's been a really enjoyable process and we're having a lot of fun with it.
Cal, tell us how you first became involved or interested in becoming an actor. Was this from a young age? Did this come a little bit later on?
Yeah,
what prompted this for you that you thought, yeah, I want to make films?
I've got a joke answer and I've got a real answer. So I always say that I was in a school panto. I was like Jack and the Beanstalk. I was playing the back of a cow and just thinking to myself, I was like, I am nailing this. I'm doing so well. Clearly I'm meant for the stage. But no, in a much more like real and palpable way, I think I've just been a very creative child. It had been a wonderful way to sort of channel emotion, understand emotion. It's life, and creativity helps us find meaning and channel meaning and learn how to live. And I think the more and more I realized that, the more drawn to it I was. I think everyone can think of one bit of media that in some small but very real way, it actually changed their lives or their philosophy or even just how you spend your day. But the arts do have an undeniable power to affect us where we live and teach us how to be. So I hope that wasn't too artsy fartsy, but that's kind of what draws me to it. And like many creatives, whenever you get a chance to be able to apply that and work on cool stuff, be it deeply meaningful or very scary or really funny or very sad or just something that allows you to channel and express something you think to be true, interesting, entertaining, or all three, then it's really fun.
No, that makes perfect sense to me. Absolutely. I don't have the ability to act, but I love horror and I love talking about it. So, this is an outlet for me. It's an outlet for Tracy. It's about finding an outlet for the talent, the expression that you feel that you do have. Let's try to go back to Mia for a second here. So, we wanted to know exactly how you became involved in this film, who contacted you, and then tell us a little bit about the part that you play.
Sure. I think Cal sort of touched on it before, but it's just through a casting website in the UK. It was listed. It looked very interesting. Reached out, sent in my showreel materials, and then got a message back and was very excited to go in and meet the director and the writer of the project. And then we met in a very casual sort of setting, which worked really well because it was like the film scene that we have already shot is like that kind of, they're in the bar, they're just young, they're talking. So it was very cool to just have that be the first instance that we met, because when we got to shooting, it already felt like we had all hung out together, which was fabulous. So I'm one of the young adults at college who my character is called Niykee, and her friend has been murdered, which is the proof of concept, which you've probably both watched. So she is very close with all these people, and they're her friends, and she loves them very much, but she's also not sure who the murderer is, and it could be anyone. So I think she's a little on edge as well.
I want to go back to the meeting that you had with Rhys Thompson and with the director of the film, the R.I.P. Man. You a little bit nervous going in? What were your feelings when you were talking to them for the first time?
I think it's nerve-wracking meeting anyone new for the first time, and you don't really know what to expect. But I feel like as soon as I got there and met everyone was very welcoming and just very open and like happy to talk, and very kind and funny people. So I think they've done a really great job bringing some really great talent together who like have a very natural way with each other. But it actually does feel like we're all friends, and we had such a great time filming that one scene. So yeah, that first meeting was the intro to the scenes that we actually shot, but it was a great time.
I'm wondering if you would like to talk about the Indiegogo campaign that is on right now to help support your project, and let us know how we can help promote this and where our listeners can learn a little bit more. So, Owen, would you be able to help us through that one?
Of course. So I've got the link written down. So it's Indiegogo/projects/the -R-I-P man is the link to the Indiegogo campaign. And we hit our minimum target quite quickly. I think it was in under 2 weeks.
Wow!
We want, the more we can get, the better the effect will be. The better the film will be, and we want to make this as good as possible.
Mm-hmm.
So, and there's actually some really great perks on there. There's lots of different things you can get. Like Rhys actually published the original screenplay before this film was even in. The ball was rolling with this film, and that's something you can get as a perk on the Indiegogo campaign. Obviously, there's much bigger perks like being a co-producer, being in association with. There's some of them have been taken, but there's quite a few different like producer roles there. You can also, if you, and even small amounts, you can get things like little silly things like a text from the R.I.P. man. Because one thing I didn't mention about my character before is that before he kills anyone, everyone gets a text. They get their birth date and their death date, and obviously the death date is today.
Oh, interesting.
And there's things just as simple as like thanks on social media, props. There's plenty of great stuff to find on there. Digital copy of the 8-minute film, which isn't available to the public at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Oh, that's so cool. I know. I did watch that, and the little intro on the Indiegogo site, like absolutely cool. Your character is, like Bruce said, kind of Nosferatu type, but creepy. So you're not at all creepy. but your character just kind of like sent shivers, just because of some of the scenes that I've seen. What was it like for you to kind of like, for that moment, get into that character? Was that kind of like an easy thing for you to pop into?
Um, it wasn't. In honesty, it wasn't the hardest because I'd throughout my whole life of acting, I always seem to get cast as villains, and so I mean, never like a monster killer in a horror film, but yeah, I've always sort of tended to get the roles for the darker characters. So, and I also used to work in a horror attraction, one of those scare mazes where I used to dress up as a zombie or play other different horror characters. So I'm quite used to sort of playing a threatening presence in films, I guess. So yeah, I mean, obviously, you know, it's a fresh character. It's you're working out the character's motivations and obviously how he moves and yeah, how he stalks his victims as well. There's all things that I had to consider. But it's yeah, it all fit into place though in filming.
No, that's kind of cool though. It's definitely a character that I think will kind of scare quite a number of people, honestly.
And one thing I say that those mouth guards are really uncomfortable after a long day of filming, so they certainly build you up into more of a bitter mood. So
I can imagine.
You know, I'm curious, Owen, about the makeup process. You mentioned the mouth guard. What else did you have to go through? Was it difficult to talk with that in your mouth? Tell us a little bit about that part of this role.
oh, absolutely, it's near impossible to talk with them in. It restricts most of your ability to talk. So whenever I had to communicate on set, I had to keep on taking them out and placing them back in. Yeah, obviously making sure they don't touch anything else. And the makeup process took about an hour. Lizzie, who does the makeup for the film, yeah, we sat in a chair, and obviously she whitened out my face and sort of made my, you know, did the effects make me look more gaunt. But then most of the process was blacking out the teeth, and that had to be constantly reapplied because yeah, it wasn't staying on with the mouth guard, and that was most of the makeup process. So every hour of this filming day, we had to keep on reapplying the blacked out teeth.
Cal, I want to talk to you a little bit about filmmaking today. You know, we're in the post-pandemic era. During the pandemic, and then you had after the pandemic kind of waned at least a little bit. There was a writer's strike going on in Hollywood. There's been tremendous ripple effects throughout the industry. How difficult is it for an actor like you, for independent filmmakers that you're involved with, given everything else that's going on in the world the last 5, 6 years?
Oh gosh, yeah, big question. Well, yeah, no, honestly, this has been my least productive year on record. I think most creatives can lend, well, not even lend empathy. I think most creatives will just prick up their ears and go and feel the same. Yeah, we felt tidal waves go through the industry because of how production was affected by COVID. I think in many ways we won't know the full effects of that until 10, 15 years on, I think. And yeah, of course, because we stand together as creatives, these strikes have a massive effect on where the American market and English market are intrinsically linked. So when one is facing an issue, so are we all. But and I think many creatives have struggled this year and in recent years, and my heart goes out to them, and I'm sure theirs return to me. But to bring it back round, creatives are creatives, and it is one of those driving forces that is, yeah, unstoppable. People are going to make art one way or another. Art can be found in you know, the lowliest of places and the highest of places. People are just driven to make it. So wherever we're at now, I still think things will come back around. I know that people are always writing new things. People have always got that. Someone out there has the next big new idea, don't they? And I think that's one of the wonderful things about the creative arts is that you're just waiting to see what can bubble its way up to the surface. What can we lift up high for everyone to see and enjoy? And yeah,
Yeah.
to bring it ground it back in this. I think indie filmmaking has always been driven by that sort of spirit in terms of we can't have everything we want. We don't have endless resources. It isn't a perfect world. There's no ideals, but we're going to make the best film we can. We're going to make a film that's better than people think that we're capable of making.
Me, I'm curious to get your thoughts on this. You're still obviously very young. You have made some other films, but as somebody who's relatively young in the industry, and you see all these crazy things that have gone on with the pandemic, with strikes, you hear a lot of people talking about the difficulty of making films today. Is it easy to be discouraged, and how do you avoid being discouraged?
I think, yeah, it is easy to be discouraged, but I think part of being an actor is thinking really positively and finding the opportunities where they are. So yeah, as a young person, yeah, you look at all these things against me, stacked up against me. But like, if you love film and you love what you're doing, you're gonna keep doing it. So there's always opportunities, and there's always ways to keep making things. Yeah.
I want to do a final round of questions for each of you having to do with love of horror, or at least in one case, maybe not loving horror, talking about favorite films. Now, Mia, you were telling us earlier that even though you're involved in this production, you find horror films a little bit difficult to get through. Tell us more about that.
I do, especially gore and blood, and like generally they're not my favorite types of films to watch. But I think to be involved in one, I'm going to see a totally different side of the genre as well. So who knows, maybe after being in this, I'm going to love horror and love slasher. So we'll see.
You know, your feeling about this is reminiscent of Adrienne Barbeau, the veteran actress who has made many horror films and has really made it very clear that she does not like horror films, doesn't really like to talk about them, but she is good at them, and she's had these offers. Of course, she was married to John Carpenter for a while, so that probably was a factor as well. So even though you don't necessarily find yourself being a big fan of horror, it's something that you can do as a profession. And you kind of remind me of Adrienne with your attitude there, which I think is good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Owen, how about you? What about some of your favorite horror films growing up, films that you particularly enjoyed and that maybe give you some background for your own acting career?
Yeah, well, started becoming like a big sort of movie geek around, I don't know, about 12. And then I started trying to take as many films as I could. And soon I stumbled across Candyman. And that was like the first horror film I think I watched where I was actually just on the edge of my seat throughout the whole thing. I mean, and fortunately for me, after seeing that, my mum was always like a huge horror fan, and she had almost shelves and shelves of films she'd recorded off TV on VHS. And yeah, also I had all the Nightmare on Elm Streets, which I got obsessed with pretty quick. A lot of the Halloween films, only the first Friday the 13th. I caught up with the rest later. Some great films like Near Dark, It. My, then I remember I saw Scream about a year later, and I got me and my whole friendship group got absolutely obsessed with that. And then I remember when the second one came out, we had a little. We were too young to see it in cinema at the time, so we all the day it came out for rental, we all like we all gathered together and watched it, and we were all like constantly trying to guess who the killers were, and that's a great memory for me. My favorite film though, my favorite horror film after all these years though, has become The Thing. I think it's one of the most intelligent and rewatchable films I've ever seen. Like, I just love trying to think about all the things that happen off camera in that film and what all the other characters are doing. I can never get bored of seeing that one. I even like the 2011 one. I think that's a great film too. Underrated.
Those are all great movies. I saw Candyman in the theaters, and I'm so, I guess, oblivious to the fear factor in horror films. I've become used to it after a while, but Candyman was a movie that did legitimately scare me while I was in the theater. And you're right about The Thing. That's a classic, another John Carpenter film. Cal, how about you? Any favorite horror films for you growing up?
Absolutely, yeah. So I'm avid horror fan. So on the other end of the spectrum, my granddad had no sense of what films were child appropriate. So I was watching like Alien and Rambo from like 12. So it's just very, yeah, early. I would say now one of them's just been taken in The Thing. I love horrors that are driven by like a powerful psychological element, or some underlying subtext. So I'm a big fan of Ari Aster. Like Midsummer and Hereditary would be up there if we're going modern, but if we were going old school, I would go The Thing and Scream. I think The Thing for its uh, both how it's powerful, its suspicion, how it keeps you guessing, and then its powerful shock factor and the practical effects, and then Scream for its self-referentialness. It's wonderfully self-aware whilst also being a great horror film. Like it doesn't get in its way so much. So yeah, yes, those are mine.
Very good, very good. We want to thank all three of our guests, all joining us from England today here in the Ghostly Gallery. They are Cal Chapman, Mia Bowd, and Owen Llewelyn, all starring in the new film, The R.I.P Man, written by Rhys Thompson. We look forward to the future segments of the film and wish all three of you the best of luck. Thanks for being with us on the program. We do appreciate it.
Thank you so
Pleasure.
much.
Thank you for having us.
Our thanks to Owen, Mia, and Cal. We will take a short break, and when we come back, Tracy and I will offer our thoughts on the new version of Salem's Lot, which debuted in October on HBO Max. It's a film that I really like, one that Tracy's not as keen on, so we'll go head to head on the new Salem's Lot. We'll continue with the Ghostly Gallery in just a moment. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Ghostly Gallery. We continue with our program. This is now the Salem's Lot portion of the show. And this is where Tracy and I talk about this much anticipated film directed by Gary Dauberman. We both very much looked forward to this film coming out, but we have very different thoughts on it. So we're going to get Tracy's opinion in a moment. But we'll begin by talking about the storyline, which is similar to the story from the 1979 miniseries that was so capably directed by Tobe Hooper. In this film, the 2024 version, we have the lead character, Ben Mears, played by Lewis Pullman. Ben Mears, a successful author who returns to his hometown of Jerusalem's Lot, Maine, or Salem's Lot, to write about his childhood. And then he soon meets another native of the lot, Susan Norton, and the two quickly begin a romantic relationship. And then right around the same time, we have a strange man named Straker who moves into town. He opens up an antique store and then moves into the infamous Marston House, the site of a string of murders, but long since abandoned. Straker kidnaps a local boy, Ralphie Glick, turns him over to his master, the hideous monster named Kurt Barlow, who also resides in the Marston house. So Ralphie is now missing and presumed to be dead. Soon his brother Danny is attacked by someone or something, and then he dies of pernicious anemia. Another boy, Mark Petrie, who is friends with the Glick brothers, believes that a vampire is responsible for the deaths, or in the case of Ralphie, his situation as a missing child. And that opinion is shared by local teacher Matt Burke. He also thinks a vampire is responsible. He sees the deteriorating physical condition of his friend Mike, who is a local gravedigger. Matt then convinces Ben Mears and Susan Norton that there is, in fact, a vampire afoot in Salem's Lot. And they will all band together with young Mark Petrie and a physician, Dr. Cody, in trying to take down the growing vampire population, along with, of course, Straker and Barlow themselves. So that is the basic gist to the film. And anyone familiar with the Stephen King story is going to be familiar with a lot of what I've just mentioned. So, Tracy, let's get your initial thoughts on the film Salem's Lot. What'd you think of it?
Um, I was really looking forward to seeing this. Ever since I heard that they were finally going to release it after all this time, I don't know. I can't remember how long it was kind of like in storage before they finally hit the release button. But I love Stephen King. So I was super curious to see how they were going to bring this movie to life in present day today. And it was also like a really well-known fact that Stephen King gave his, stamp of approval to this version of Salem's Lot. He posted it on X, and I read tons of different articles making reference about it. And he raved about this copy of Salem's Lot. So to me, that was a nice big green flag. I was like, oh yeah, I'm really looking forward to this. But I've said this 100 times before. I'm not a huge fan of remakes. Sometimes they work and sometimes they don't. I'm of the mindset that if the original movie was a success and it did really well the first time, then please just leave it be. If it's not broken, don't try to fix it. I think it's fine the way that it was. But if a filmmaker wants to redo a classic, I feel they need to be really, really careful. They need to be extremely talented and respectful to the original storyline, but adding their own imagination at the same time to enhance the movie. And when I say enhance, I don't mean all kinds of weird special effects and stuff, but just give the viewer a little bit more of the story. The movie started out really promising for me. Everything was kind of like ticking along as it should be in my eyes. But in this case of this Salem's Lot, I was a little disappointed. I was expecting like a modernized version of the original story, kind of verbatim, but crispy but the same kind of a feel. I don't know. Honestly, I felt the story was maybe a little bit rushed. There were lots of things, like you had mentioned, that were included in this new version that was in the original version. But there was a lot of stuff missing at the same time. So I'll leave it at that as my initial kind of like thoughts, and I'll get back to you on the rest.
Well, the original was actually a TV miniseries. We often refer to the original from 79 as a movie. And you can certainly, you can put the two episodes together, but it was a miniseries. And I think each was like an hour and a half. So it was basically a 3-hour movie, which is pretty long. And there's a lot more of an opportunity to get into character development. And there's certainly a lot more depth to the 1979 production. This film from 2024 is about an hour and 50 minutes, maybe an hour 53, something like that. So it's a little more than an hour less. And there's not as much time for the director, Gary Dauberman, to get into characters and to get into maybe some of the backstory as well. So there's some limitations right off the start that he had to deal with. When I look at remakes, I guess I have a similar approach to you. I like to see a remake that honors the original story, but also makes enough significant changes to keep the story fresh, to keep it surprising, to keep it guessing. And I think even with the limitations of time, I think Dauberman did that in this film. Let's talk about some of the differences, some of which I think were really good, others maybe not. First of all, early in the film, we see Mark Petrie, who is being bullied by another student in school. I don't remember seeing any of that in the original film. Petrie almost immediately pushes back and he beats up this bully who's got a bad reputation to begin with. And Mark shows himself to be a character of toughness and strength right off the bat. So I thought that was good.
Mhm.
This also leads to a disciplinary meeting with the teacher, Matt Burke, who's a big part of the novel. But again, I don't remember him really being a character in the 1979 miniseries. So Matt Burke has this meeting with Mark. This introduced Burke to the story in this film. And Matt Burke is mostly sympathetic to Mark, having to deal with this troublemaking student who's always bullying everybody. So that was an important change, and I thought the introduction of Burke was a good move. I think it's a good character. Then the second thing, we see a lot of interaction between Straker and the kids, something that was mostly not shown in 1979. So this establishes Straker not only as a kidnapper, but he's also a character who really gives off the vibe of a pedophile, to be quite honest. Unfortunately, the character of Straker is not played very well by the actor Pilo Asbæk, and I think that's a major weakness in the film. I mean, it's hard to match what James Mason did with Straker in 1979, but Asbæk falls way, way short. I think he's really the weak link. The only thing that maybe is a little bit interesting about the Straker in this movie is that it does establish that he and Barlow, they're completely evil. They don't consider children off limits, and children are just as likely to be targeted as adults. So this change doesn't. It's important to the story in a sense, but it's just not effectively executed given the actor's performance. Then the third difference. Now, in 1979, there was very little screen time given to the actual vampire, Barlow, played by Reggie Nalder. People they've timed it. He's actually only on screen for 1:13. So in the original film, we don't see very much of Barlow at all. In this movie, we do get to see him a little bit more. If you include the scene at the end where his arm is punching through the cars as he's trying to get Mark Petrie, probably about 2 minutes, maybe a little more than 2 minutes of screen time where Barlow is actually on screen. So we do get a little bit more of him, but maybe still unsatisfying for a lot of people. I think a lot of people wanted to see Barlow more. In terms of his appearance, he looks very similar to the monstrous vampire that was played by Reggie Nalder back in 1979. Not a lot of difference there. And then another difference that we see, and for me, this is a negative. The Marston house, which was such a huge part of the 1979 series, is almost an afterthought here. I mean, there's some scenes there, but they don't get into the history of the Marston house, Hubie Marston, who was a murderer. None of that backstory is talked about. And in fact, the writer, Ben Mears, in the original film, he's coming back to Salem's Lot specifically to write about the Marston house. In this movie, for some reason, he's not. Maybe they didn't feel they had enough time to work on that, but I think that's a change that did not work out well. So some of the changes I thought were good. The scenes establishing Mark Petrie as this tough, courageous kid, I thought that was good. We got a little bit more of Barlow at the very end of the film. That was good. But the characterization of Straker and the lack of the Marston house, those were changes that just did not work out at all. So kind of a mixed bag. Curious, Tracy, what were your thoughts on these changes from 1979 to 2024?
Well, like you, I really, really would have liked to have more information about the Marston house. It should have been talked about at least somewhat, instead of just kind of like off to the side, and why Ben was so focused on coming back to Salem's Lot. I think there was a lot of history missing from the new 2024 movie. So I think that was a downfall. It was something that was overlooked. I really like the character of Mark Petrie, played by Jordan Preston Carter. he was a true monster kid, and I thought he did really great in the role. He was super phenomenal. Ben Mears, who was played by Lewis Pullman, although he was really, really great in this movie, he really was, don't get me wrong. But I couldn't really vibe with him in that role. I had a really hard time with it, but I think it's just because I don't think anybody can fill the big shoes of David Soul. Again, like Pullman was not bad. I think I'm just biased and maybe I'm just feeling old, but
Yeah.
I think that character was David Soul. But just to talk about Striker for a minute. After I saw this for the first time, I remember talking to you about it, about just how oddly they presented the character in the new movie. And Bruce, he was just so weird and over the top, and I'm not sure why he was portrayed that way. It was a total instant dislike for me. Which was the point, I guess. He wasn't meant to be a likable character, but he reminded me of one of those cartoony like type sketchy villains with, the twisty mustaches and archy eyebrows.
Yeah, right.
I just really didn't like the character. It bothered me, and there was just something off and unsettling about him. But some of the other changes, I mean, they were okay. I did like to see Barlow a little bit more in this movie. I'm glad they kept his appearance somewhat similar, which was great. He was definitely terrifying, I'll say that. But, some of the changes were okay, but I'm just a hardcore Die original. So yeah, that's kind of how I feel about that. But yeah, imagination is a good thing, but I just feel they could have done a little bit more with some of the things that they didn't talk about.
Hey, it's a high standard you're trying to reach here when you're remaking a film that was critically acclaimed, was very popular its first time around when it aired on the network in those two parts. I remember watching it, and there was a lot of anticipation for it, and it didn't disappoint. So when you're trying to match that, it's not easy. And I don't think this film, even though I like it, I don't think it's as good as what Tobe Hooper did. So let's give our final assessments. In my mind, the new Salem's Lot has three major strengths. Number one, it is beautifully shot. It looks like a film that should have been in theater and not on HBO Max when it debuted. It's got plenty of atmosphere, excellent special effects. I mean, visually, it's a very well done, very attractive film. So from that standpoint, first rate. Second, outside of Asbake as Straker, who obviously pales in comparison to James Mason, has to be said. But outside of him, the acting is very good. I thought Lewis Pullman as Ben, Mackenzie Lee as Susan, Bill Camp as the teacher Matt Burke, and as you mentioned, Jordan Preston Carter as Mark. They're all excellent in their roles. They make their characters believable and really, for the most part, likable. So that was good. And then third, the finale to Salem's Lot, which uses the local drive-in theater as the primary location. I thought that was really creatively, effectively, expertly done. The large movie screen actually provides the vampires with shade from the sun during the late afternoon, and the many parked cars end up being very effective props in the story. So I thought that was great. That was a major change from the 1979 series, and it was fantastic. That was a real strength. All in all, I like this movie. As I said, certainly not as good as the 79 miniseries. We've mentioned it was a longer production back then, allowed for better character development. But given the limitations of basically a 2-hour film, I thought this version of Salem's Lot did a very capable job of setting the story and giving us at least a little bit of glimpse into the characters. So I'm a fan of it. I like it. I'd watch it again. 3.5 stars for me for the 2024 adaptation of Salem's Lot. Tracy, what about your rating for the film? What do you think?
Well, you know what? I agree with you. The film was beautifully shot. The aesthetic just kind of brought me back to a time when things were a little more innocent. There was like a sense of nostalgia, the music, just, the old cars, the ending to the film. It was excellent, but it's not what I expected at all. But it was an interesting concept. But, I go back to the very beginning thing that I said about doing remakes. I think, the filmmaker could have stayed a little closer to the storyline and built on that character development a little bit more. And using his new ending, it probably would have been better for me. I mean, it's a Stephen King story, plain and simple. I think it deserved a lot more time than what it was given. I want to say that it kind of deserves a mini series a la Mike Flanagan-esque type of a production. I just feel that's what was missing, and that is what's needed. I would only give the 2024 Salem's Lot a 2.5-star rating. It wasn't terrible. It really wasn't, but it wasn't great. It just didn't meet my expectations. There was so much hype about it, and my expectations, they were like sky high through the roof for this film. So I was somewhat disappointed. I don't know if I would go back and watch it again. I might not. But another thing that might have triggered my disappointment, honestly, was I went back and watched the original just after I finished the other one. Yeah. So I think that kind of brought my disappointment level down again too. So it was too close for comparison. Yeah. But 2.5 stars, that's the best I can do for this one.
I know you wanted to like it. You want to give it more stars, but you got to be honest, right? So you're going 2.5.
2.5. 2.5.
All right, 2.5 stars from Tracy, 3.5 stars from me for the new version, the new adaptation of Stephen King's Salem's Lot. Tracy, we thank you as always for being with us and, of course, producing the show. What would we do without you? I shudder to think of what we would do. Also want to thank our guests, Owen Llewelyn, Mia Bowd, and Cal Chapman, talking about their new film, The R.I.P Man. Thanks to all of you for listening, for joining us in this Museum of the Macabre. And we hope that you'll join us once again next time, right here in the Ghostly Gallery.